So just thinking back to your painting journey and career.
Yeah.
So like when did it start?
I suppose officially after I left school, when I didn't know what to do. I took a year off, and I thought going to art college was probably a good move. So I thought going to art college was probably a good move. So I got onto a foundation course for a year and decided I wanted to do fine art, which I think I pretty much knew anyway. So and then I went on a 3-year fine art course down in Bournemouth.
Nice. Why did you decide like art college?
Well, I'd buggered about at school mainly and not exactly made the best of my abilities. I had been offered a place at London University to do French, but I didn't get the grades at A-level. So that wasn't going to happen, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do anyway. So, but I was creative from a young age. When I was very young, I was always very creative, drawing and writing and painting. And I kind of stopped doing it to a large degree whilst I was at school. So I thought, I had an inclination to start doing that kind of thing again. So I couldn't think of anything better to do with my time. Certainly. Wasting it away. I travelled a bit first, and then that was it. Yeah.
Right.
I had to settle into something, so that's what I opted for.
Yeah. So what do you love most about painting?
I enjoy applying it, and I enjoy working with colour and seeing where it leads. I don't know, what do I enjoy most about it? Seeing an image appear from a blank canvas gradually, and once it gets to a certain stage and you can be a bit more adventurous with it, have fun with it, and it's worth getting it to a point where you feel it's achieved what you set out to do, and possibly something a bit other than what you set out to do. But
So what's the process like? Do you sketch it out first, or?
usually, yeah. Well, always, in fact, yeah. Rather than usually, I sketch it out with a pencil, and then pick up a brush with some umber and just fill it in tonally, and once I've got a fairly complete, not too much detail, but at least it's a framework to work on, and you can usually tell if it's going to work compositionally, or it's a good starting point. It's I would never recommend someone putting colour straight onto a white canvas. I don't like doing it, so I always prime the canvas first as well with a sort of burnt umber-ish sort of hue, which I then work on with my tones, and then then it becomes fun once you think it's compositionally liable to work or has the potential to work, and the tonal bits sort of worked out, then getting the colour on is rather that's when the fun starts for me, really. Yeah.
And why did you choose post-impressionist?
I just like that kind of painting. I mean, I never think of myself as a post-impressionist as such, but if someone asked me what my style is most akin to, I would say probably that sort of period. I mean, I've always liked Vincent van Gogh's painting, and his life stories always fascinated me, so I was inevitably going to be influenced by him, certainly, and that was why, really. I mean, I've tried also. Sometimes I look at other paintings and I think that's probably the way I should have gone, and there are all sorts of different options. I mean, I can paint in a variety of styles when I'm commissioned to do so, but for my own purposes, you have to settle on something that that's going to work for me. So.
And how would you describe one of your paintings?
How would I describe it?
I don't know. That's a very good question, because you just talked about post-impressionists.
Yeah.
What do you use?
Oil paint. Well, the tonal bit, the initial marks are made with watered down acrylics, really, the tonal part. And then I use oil paint. Actually, these days I use water solvent oil paints as well, so they smell less. I don't think they dry any more quickly. I don't like them to dry too quickly. I actually work wet on wet most of the process.
Why is that?
I just like it. I like the way oil paint is, and I like being able to mess around with it a bit. I mean, it's a tricky process to a degree, because if you're putting wet paint onto wet paint, you run the risk of smearing and colours running into each other in a way that's not always desirable. So you have to develop methods of getting the one layer of paint on top of the other without, making unpleasant colours or unpleasant marks, which is very easy to do if you're doing that wet on wet. So that's part of the challenge, and I like that. I enjoy that. Yeah.
And what would you say makes a technically good painting?
Well, one that works to communicate what it's set out to do, I suppose. I mean, there are all sorts of styles and techniques you can approach that with, but as long as an artist you feel you've achieved what you set out to do, and as a viewer you feel that the artist has achieved something worthwhile, it's hard to judge otherwise beyond that.
Can you look at other paintings and know whether they're technically good or not?
Yeah, sometimes it's a matter of opinion, but there are so many different painters, and over the centuries especially, and some I just don't like, others I like a lot. Often I'll look at a technique and be quite very I can be impressed by an artist's technique and still not particularly like the product, or whatever that might mean, whether it's produced something that justified the time spent on it, perhaps sometimes, but I like to look at paintings and see how they've been done. Yeah.
And what do you want a viewer to think and feel when they look at one of your paintings?
I suppose I like the idea that there's an element of traditional aesthetic qualities that will somehow uplift the person's frame of mind somehow. I like to use colour and subject to achieve that. And there's lots of great paintings being done over the centuries. I can look at a Rembrandt or a Caravaggio or a Velasquez and I can think, God, how do you compete with that? But at the same time, what they did is something that it's not what I'm setting out to do, and much as I could spend all day looking at a Rembrandt in a gallery, but I wouldn't actually want it hanging in my environment that I live in. So it's too dark. Often the subject matter's too dark for me to live with. And Obviously within the arts there's plenty of room for the darker areas of human experience and emotion, but my paintings I think are more about creating something that you might want to live with in your environment.
So do you like light
Yeah.
paintings?
Yeah. I like painting. A lot of my paintings based in Sardinian landscapes and what have you, because I like the light out there. I go there quite a lot. I've been there quite a lot over the years, and you see colours in that sort of light that you don't see so readily in England, for example.
What sort of colours do you see out there?
Well, violets and blues in the shadows and in the distant hills and what have you, and it sort of inspires you to be a bit bolder with colour generally, I think. So,
do you paint from a photograph or?
Oh yeah, I definitely use photographs. Yeah, I mean they usually start life out there, whether it's a drawing or whatever, or a painted sketch, or the start of a painting, but most of the work's done in studio afterwards, certainly with reference to photographs. Yeah. I mean, I think that the important matter is the finished product. So how one gets to it is one's own business, but I use all sorts of methods, but certainly photographs. Yeah.
And you do commissions?
I do, yes, plenty. I've done quite a few over the years. Occasionally it's to produce reproductions of well-known paintings or paintings of well-known artists. But it can be all sorts of things, yeah. Portraits as well. But it requires me to have painted a variety of styles and techniques. So, yeah, I take on commissions of all sorts, and there's a few examples on my website as well. That sort of thing.
Do you do portraits?
I do. I've done quite a few of those over the years. Family portraits, or single subject portraits, whatever. Yeah, humans usually. Don't think I've done many animals.
How long does it take to complete a painting?
Well, it varies obviously, but I work a lot more quickly these days. I mean, the one I've just finished probably took about 4 days. It can take less, maybe actually three days really, complete, full days.
You get absorbed when you start.
I do, but I like working at speed now, and It's I suppose a confidence thing, as you get older and you've been doing it for longer. As a large part of it is, you're spending less time being tentative, and you're just sort of getting it on there. Know what's going on more instinctively, perhaps. And you can get more done, which is always a good thing, I think.
Especially with commissions.
Especially with commissions. Well, it depends on the commission. Again, if I'm given a commission, I'll probably be working in a different style, which will will require me to work a bit more methodically, possibly. I mean, if someone commissioned me to paint a Caravaggio reproduction or something, obviously I'm not going to race through that, certainly. But painting my own way, my own paintings, I'm painting rather quickly. But no, a commission's going to take a bit longer, yeah.
And how do you go about doing a reproduction?
Well, again, if you look on the internet, you're going to find, I mean, for example, I was commissioned not long ago to do a reproduction of Van Gogh's Starry Night over the Rhone. And I had actually fortunately recently seen it in a gallery in London. So I had a fairly good sense of the colours. In fact, I think I photographed it in situ. Because if you go on the internet, you're going to get a whole different variety of colours, reproductions of it, paint, or of the original, just photographed in different lights or whatever. So it's can be quite difficult to get an idea of the real colours that were used in the painting from photographs that you find on the internet. Yeah.
Starting a story about...
with commissions, reproductions of famous paintings or what have you, you do get this problem with photographs on the internet not all presenting the same colours, colour palettes. The photographs and the lighting they're taken in and all sorts of processes are going to influence that. But the reproduction I did of Van Gogh's Starry Night over the Rhone, I had just seen that in a London gallery, which helped. But I did have a commission a few years ago for a Russian fellow who had a residence in Park Lane in London, in which he had a couple of rather valuable paintings. One was a Landskoi, the other was a Vlaminck, Maurice de Vlaminck, who was a Fauvist painter, associate of Matisse and the like. And he asked me, he was advised by his insurance company to, instructed actually to put them in storage. So he commissioned me to do reproductions of the paintings, which made life a bit easier because I could refer to them directly because they were actually there, and I could photograph them as well. So, and I could check that my photographs were true to life. But usually you don't get that. If I'm asked to do a reproduction, it's usually I don't get access to the original. So you have to work it out yourself somehow. To just look at as many images as possible and do it that way.
So can you work out how Van Gogh, for example, painted a painting?
Well, yeah, pretty much. I've looked into his work and life quite a bit, and he worked very quickly. His last 2 months of his life, he's supposed to have completed, I think, 70 paintings, in 2 months, which is at least one a day, possibly more. So he was definitely a very fast worker, and obviously he was working wet on wet, inevitably. But you can see roughly how he worked from looking closely at his canvases.
Right. Interesting. I've often wondered that actually. Like, how the hell do you like copy it, the technique and like?
I've copied Van Gogh's. I'm not sure I've copied Van Gogh's by not necessarily using the technique he'd have used. It depends how you're going about it. I think there would be some who would approach the reproduction of Van Gogh, and to them the most important thing would be getting the energy right, the energy of the brush marks, and getting his approach copied as closely as possible to the way he'd have actually done it. But I think I've tried to get the brush marks landing in as closely as possible to where they're positioned in the original canvas. And obviously trying to retain the sense of energy as well. But in order to achieve that, I've had to go, use processes that Van Gogh wouldn't have used himself, obviously, because he's working in the energy of the moment, whereas I'm looking at where the brush strokes he used are on that canvas and trying to get them in the same places.
Would you use the same sort of bristles on the brush that?
I think so. Yeah. But I've never wanted to risk creating something which might be mistaken for an attempt to produce a copy, a forgery. In other words, I haven't used old canvas or aging techniques or anything like that. No, it's obvious from the, if you look at the back, it's not an original Van Gogh. But if you look at the front, who knows, eh?
I can't tell the difference.
Really? Wow.
Have you got a favourite environment where you like painting?
Yeah, as long as it's sort of isolated, no risk of interruption. I mean, you do get, if you're painting out in the fields, which I'm not that keen on doing, you do tend to get, it depends where you are, but open air painting is, I think, often interrupted by passers-by, well-meaning passers-by, who want to engage with the artist, which I prefer to be just getting on with my work uninterrupted, in isolation. Yeah.
Does painting help you overcome any challenges, personal challenges in life?
Well, it does. It takes you out of the real world, yeah, and whatever challenges that real world is putting on your doorstep at the time. I mean, you've got to return to it obviously at some stage, but everyone is haunted by, most people I suspect, by fears, anxieties, whatever, and I'm no exception. And yeah, painting takes me out of that to a significant degree. Yeah.
That's a good one. It's all about mental health these days, isn't it?
Certainly is.
I think. Oh no, I've got one here.
Oh.
So do you offer prints as well as?
Yes, fine art giclée prints are represented on the website, which is a good way to have one of my images on your wall without having to cough up the full price of an original painting, which I think is still the best way of experiencing, definitely the best way of experiencing a painting, and worth finding the extra shekels for. But yeah, a good giclée print is definitely a good second best. Damn sight cheaper, and very good quality image as well they produce nowadays. Yeah.
So why would some people think that paintings are expensive?
Because they can be. There's two different images of the cost of paintings and the relative value of an artist and what he produces. There's the Van Gogh image of this, the impoverished artist working away in his garret, who should be grateful for anything he gets, who can, eat when he can and what have you. And there's the other extreme where, paintings sell for millions, and quite a few millions. And I find both faintly ridiculous. I certainly have no aspirations to be starving in a garret, and I quite happily see my paintings sell for millions, but I'd also quite happily sell them for somewhere in between the two. You know, I think, you know, I like to put a reasonable price, you know, that I think is affordable, but also recognises what I've put into it. You know, it's years of getting good at what you do, and the time you spend on doing it as well anyway. And I think compared to most people's demands for what they produce in life, I don't think anything I'm charging is unreasonable. I think an artist should expect to be properly paid for his for what he produces. You know, you don't have to buy it, but if you do, all the better.
Totally agree.